have a seat, sit down. We're still organizing a bit the seats here in Glasgow. Please have a seat. Okay. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to welcome everybody here, both in Glasgow and online, to the session about peatland policy strategies in Germany, about new policy approaches. The session is organized by the German Ministry of Environment, together with the Greifswald Mire Center and the Global Peatlands Initiative. And a special warm welcome to Jochen Flasbarth, who is today here in the Peatland Pavilion. Jochen Flasbarth is the State Secretary of the Ministry of Environment of Germany. The Peatland Pavilion is actually the first ever Peatland Pavilion on a climate conference. And it's organized by a team of partners under the umbrella of the Global Peatlands Initiative. And we are very happy that this year, and it's not an accident that we are in Scotland with the Peatland Pavilion, that we really can raise the profile of peatlands at climate conferences. We have 2 weeks of peatland sessions from all over the world, so you're very welcome and invited to join other sessions. My name is Franziska Tanneberger. I'm director of the Greifswald Mire Center, one of the co-organizers of the Peatland Pavilion. The aim of this session is to share experiences from Germany, to learn from each other, also to look at the European level and at the global level, what we can learn from each other in terms of policy approaches. And Germany is probably a good example of how to deal with a very bad situation with regard to peatlands. And we will hear more about this from Jochen Flasbarth now. Very welcome, the stage is yours.
Hi all together. Thanks, Franziska, for announcing me here. Actually, I had prepared a video message in advance because I was not so sure what would happen here over these days. But it was my intention from the very beginning that this video would not be shown and that I can make it to be here. I mean, we are dealing here with many topics. But some are closer to your hearts than others. And same here. What you're discussing here is very close to my heart. And when I jump in a short while to the traffic and transport people, I will speak their passionate, hopefully as well. But still, it is not so close to my heart. The difference is, I mean, if you are talking about climate change technologies, what we have to do with our energy systems, with our traffic and transport system, and our industry, all this is needed, but it's usually understood intellectually. And what you're dealing with here is, apart from all the physical issues that peatlands are extremely relevant for the storage of carbon dioxide and of reducing greenhouse gas emission coming out of destroyed peatlands. It's also at the end about landscapes. And when I visited, I was invited by Franziska to visit one of the sites a couple of weeks ago. Then you are really in on the landscape and you see the relationship between what we are discussing here and what is wonderfully now in the draft of the cover decision, that there is a link between biodiversity and climate change and mitigating climate change, and that we have to keep our ecosystem services. That is all right, and you see it once you enter into concrete projects to keep what we have as peatlands, and that is little enough in my country. I know it is also little in many other countries. So the one thing we are focusing on in Germany, and we just came up with a draft of a national peatland strategy, is to keep what we have, to put it under best protection possible. But that is only a quite small contribution we can do. The rest is how to revitalize peatlands, which is basically how to re-wet peatlands. And there is something that happened over the last, I would say, 30 years. Also, with the intelligence and the science we got, for example, from Greifswald University, and now from Greifswald Moore Center, and from guys like Hans sitting there relaxed in the back, Hans, to get a much better understanding how a modern conservation work has to be. And it is definitely not to put everything under protection. It is how to get the ecosystem services back, and at the same time allowing for production on the land side. So to combine land use practices in a modern and a clever way with making best use out of what peatlands can provide for us. And that is, on the one hand, the capacities as a sink and stopping the emissions out of destroyed peatlands. But it is also when you look at the products that can be gained from these sites. And the paludicultures, I think I can make a promise. It will be in the governmental contract. I can promise. I have an eye on it. And I think stepwise people understand that we can produce double win situation. And what Greifswald Moore Center and the partners are doing together to have a look what could be the products we can gain from these sites is really extremely valuable. It has a lot to do with innovation because you create products that are not market ready yet, and that is something my ministry wants to focus on, and I hope whoever takes care on that portfolio in the future, that we continue to focus on that, how to get it into the markets. And this is nothing that happens from today to tomorrow. You have to have some seed money. You have to have partners from business that are ready to step in. And I know that you're working heavily on these partnerships in Germany, and we as a government want to support it. Just by finalizing, I mentioned the draft of the peatland strategy. I'm quite sure that it will be covered in the government contract, new government's contract. But we also just finalized and signed an agreement between our lender in Germany, those who are not coming from Germany. We are a federal republic. The longer I'm on the federal level, the less I like it, but it's a reality. So we have to get them in because they are doing the work on the ground. We are providing the framework on that with the support of the national government. So sorry for the need to be brief. I think it will fit to your program and to have a lively discussion. And thanks for having me here.
Thank you very much, not only for giving a few small insights, maybe in the cover decision, into what the new German government contract may include in terms of peatlands. That makes us very happy, of course, but also to talk about that peatlands are close to your heart. This is also something that we notice here. Many people have an emotional relationship to peatlands. They also come to our map outside. They look at it. They get proud that they have peatlands in their country. So this is something we really also like to stress here with this pavilion. Thank you very much for this. We now come to our first remote speaker. We have now a set of 3 longer presentations about peatland policy strategies in Germany. And our first speaker is Maxwell Kaspers. She's also from the Ministry of Environment in Germany. She is head of the Peatland unit, heavily dealing with all the peatland-related issues in Germany. A warm welcome to Mechthild, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Franziska, for the kind introduction. And also from my side, a warm welcome to our panelists and to our audience in the Peatland Pavilion and on the video platform. And I will now try to give a little bit more detailed overview of our policy approach that Jochen Flasbarth already lined out. So First of all, let me give you some background why we need a new approach. As you already heard, in the past, peatland protection in Germany has concentrated in large parts on conservation measures for intact peatlands and on renaturing peatlands from a nature conservation perspective. These stay important tasks, and we need to continue this work. The majority of peatlands is still in unfavorable conservation status, and too many moss species are on the red list. But we have this additional topic to address that is gaining urgency as the climate crisis is growing. In Germany, 90% of peat soils are drained and mostly in agricultural use. They are not recognizable as peatlands, and the emissions from these organic soils are reported as grassland or cropland emissions. But it is the drained peat that is causing huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. Although peatlands cover only 4% of the German land area, 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by agriculture originate from peat soil. This is 53 megatons of CO2 equivalent, or it's a third, roundabout, of all the emissions that are connected to agriculture. There's only one way to reduce these emissions. This is rewetting of the drained soils. As you can see in the chart on the right, by raising the water levels, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions to a large extent. This is why we need to act more ambitiously from a climate action perspective. So let me give you a short overview of the new instruments we put in place for peatland protection. I will get to them in more detail on the next slides. The instruments comprise the Federal Climate Change Act, the Climate Action Plan 2050, which is our long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategy, a new target agreement with the lender, a national peatland protection strategy, national funding, and pilot projects for peatland protection. Let me first talk about the Climate Change Act. In 2021, for the first time, quantified targets for the emissions and removals in the land use sector were set by the German Parliament. To meet these targets, we will need ambitious measures for peatland protection. And we need to improve our way of monitoring and reporting for the land use sector, which is also foreseen by the Climate Change Act. Since 2016, we already had provisions on peatland protection as a part of our long-term strategy, the Climate Action Plan 2050. This strategy laid the foundation for our work in the past years and called for exactly those instruments that now constitute our peatland protection policy. A very important instrument that we have in place now is the target agreement between the federal level and the federal states in Germany, the so-called Länder. I am very happy that we have Wolfram Güdler on this panel today, who will later talk and share his insights from the Länder perspective. The agreement's main focus is on climate action and on the rewetting of peat soils in agricultural use. The climate target is to reduce the annual greenhouse gas emissions from drained peat soil by 5 megatons CO2 equivalent by the year of 2030. What is most important to me, we want to do this together with landowners and land users, as Jochen Flasbarth already said. We will provide financial incentives for rewetting, and we want that the rewetted land will stay in an adapted agricultural use. This can, for example, be achieved with paludiculture. We also want to phase out peat extraction, as this as well causes not that many, but still considerable greenhouse gas emissions. The National Peatland Protection Strategy contains the goals and measures that apply to the federal level. This strategy was published 1st September 2021. It supports the target agreement and it supplements already existing strategies and programs of the Länder. To set up the strategy, we started with early on and in-depth outreach to stakeholders and to national and international experts. We appreciate the support that we received and that we were able to draw from the knowledge of these experts. It soon became very clear that we needed the national strategy to cover all aspects of peatland protection, from nature conservation to rewetting, and including a range of cross-cutting issues. Let me only highlight two of the topics which I think relate strongly to our event today and to the mission of the Peatland Pavilion. It is the importance of public outreach and stakeholder involvement, and the need for action and cooperation on international and EU level. Only if we take these topics seriously, we will be able to succeed. In order to enable rapid action for peatland protection, the federal government will provide substantial funding. By 2025, the federal government will have provided up to 330 billion euros for measures that strongly contribute to climate change mitigation. And financing of peatland protection has to continue afterwards as well. In addition, pilot projects with most ambitious rewetting measures will be funded starting this year. The first of these pilot projects started in September 2021. 3 more projects are in preparation. They focus on establishment of polludiculture for innovative products, on the development of new value chains, and on the socio-economic perspective for local farmers. Looking back at the process for developing these instruments, there are some lessons that stick out to me. Broad and early on stakeholder involvement is key. You here see a picture of our State Secretary Jochen Flasbarth when we visited a site that is foreseen for rewetting. And I think this is very important to get an impression on the site and talking to the people. Another thing that sticks out, peatland protection is an intergenerational task for whole regions. The concepts for peatland protection need to be adapted to the local situation. Landowners and land users need support and should become partners, our partners, for peat soil protection. Interdisciplinary approaches and engagement on all levels of government is needed. Knowledge sharing speeds up the process. This is something that we really experienced strongly. We drew from the knowledge others offered to us, and this helped us with building our new policy approach. Cooperation on European and international level is needed to gain momentum. There are things we cannot do on our own, and we will rely on building strong partnerships with others. With this, I would like to conclude and reaffirm that we appreciate all the knowledge and experience that was made available to us, and that it is our pleasure to share now experiences that we gained and will be gaining in the future. Thank you very much.
Good for giving this overview on all the federal instruments or the development at the federal level. And we now move on to a speaker from Bavaria. This is one of the federal states. In southern Germany, we have 6 peatland-rich federal states. Bavaria is one of them, a very active state in terms of peatland management. And we will have Wolfram Güttler from the Bavarian State Ministry of Environment with us. He is deputy head of the Nature Conservation Department and dealing with all the peatland-related work in Bavaria. So please start the presentation, and we are looking forward to hear how things are developing in Bavaria.
And a very warm welcome from Bavaria. Well, I want to present the Bavarian concept of peatland protection and how we fit the goals agreed between the national and state level, between Germany and the Länder. Well, Bavaria is one of them. And well, I hope I can give you some impressions about what we are doing. I'm working on the ground, so English is not the normal language I have to use, so I apologize for it. Maybe you can understand me. Well, the second slide, please. Well, in Bavaria, we have about 3% of our landscape covered with peatland. As you can see on the right-hand side, we find peatlands in Bavaria all around, and they are concentrated in the south. After a long history of peatland cultivation and drainage, about 220,000 hectares of peatland remain today. Well, it's a pity, but it's reality. Only 5% of these peatlands are in a natural condition. You can see it in the middle in the slide. And around 85% are drained and in use for agriculture and forestry. On the left-hand side, you can see peatland with agricultural land use, which this is very typical in Bavaria. Yeah. So yesterday somebody told me we are a very good example for a bad situation, and well, that's reality. So we go to the next slide. Let's have a deeper look at the conditions of Bavarian peatlands. While peatlands cover only 3% of the area of Bavaria, I told you already, they contribute about 5% of the Bavarian greenhouse gas emissions. These are about 5 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year in numbers. On the right-hand side, you can see the peatland emission map in Bavaria. We are very proud to have this, and I think it's a very useful instrument to talk to politicians or communities about peatlands and their important role in climate things. In the middle, you can see an instrumentation to measure climate active gases emitted by peat soils. These measurements take place on different peat soil types with different land uses and are base of the emission map. This map shows us the hotspots we need to focus our efforts. So we use it very often, and I don't know if other states have something like that, but it is a very important and useful thing to have such a map. Besides the greenhouse gas emissions of the drained peatlands, drainage led to a loss of valuable habitats, to problems with landscape, water, household, and many other ecological problems. I think Jochen told already before, and so I have to mention it quite quickly. So go to the next slide, please. Well, what is the reaction of our political leaders? On the right-hand side, you see the Bavarian Prime Minister talking about peatland in Parliament. So you can see it's an important thing in Bavaria, and we are very proud to have politicians who talk about peatlands. Additional to the goals agreed between national and state level, the Bavarian state government stated ambitious goals for peatland restorations. It is planned to revet and restore 2,000 hectares of one of our biggest fen by 2030. This is only one pilot project. We have another more, but it's a very important and ambitious one, I think. It is planned to revet 50,000 hectares by 2040. The Bavarian peatlands are not only located in agricultural and forest areas, but also around settlements and even, as an example, on the area of Munich Airport. Therefore, revetting projects can be difficult and need adequate buffer zones to avoid any effects on neighboring properties. So I think 55,000 hectares revetting wetlands is a very ambitious aim we have. The main goal is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from Bavarian peat soils by 1/3 until 2050. This is equivalent to 1.6 million tons of CO2 equivalent per year. So we go one slide further, and well, what are the concepts to have a solution for all these ambitious targets we have? The Bavarian peatland climate concept is based on 3 programs. All of them follow the principle of voluntariness. This means that landowners and land users are not forced into measures, but invited to be part of the solution. I think that is a very important thing for us. The first program runs under the lead management of the Bavarian State Ministry of the Environment and Consumer Protection and is called Peatland Wilderness Program. I'm responsible for it. Its focus lies on the protection of natural peatlands and the restoring of drained peatlands to a natural condition. Besides the reduction of emissions, another important goal of this program is the protection of species and habitats. The targeted areas have either no or very extensive agricultural land use. In Bavaria alone, 30 new employees were hired to achieve these goals of these programs. So we have we have a lot of people to get involved in these programs. Otherwise, we have no chance to get success. And then we have two other big programs. The next is the Peatland Forestry program, and it aims to revet and restore peatlands in Bavarian state forests. Peatland restoration projects in this program have the advantage that the area is state-owned, so in most cases, it is not necessary to involve third parties. The left picture, as an example, shows a pine forest on peat soil. And the responsibility for this program is in the State Ministry of Food, Agriculture and Forestry. That is also the same in the next program, the Peatland Farmer Program. It is currently in development. It aims to restore peatland soils to a condition with less emissions, with the area continues to be used for agriculture. A common way to achieve this would be to turn intensive cropland into grassland or pasture. Other solutions for the management of wet peatland are paludiculture and adjustable water tables. As an example, you can see a pasture with water buffaloes on the right bottom. All three programs work hand in hand to implement the Bavarian and national peatland protection and restoration goals. And we have a very good cooperation with our colleagues in the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Forestry. Well, what are the things we have learned? Well, do you have the next slide, please? And as you can see on the left-hand side, peatlands restoration in Bavaria faces some challenges, and luckily we have many solutions at hand. The main challenges are public acceptance and conflicts over the revetting process. There are still many economic conflicts in the restoration of peatlands. People fear that moisture or floods damage their houses, or that their property loses value due to mosquito swarms or fog. Therefore, it is fundamental to involve the local community at a very early stage of planning. In addition, communication and planning experts on site are necessary to ensure a good communication between all parties involved. Well, these are the 30 people I have that they have to go on the ground, talk with the people, talk with the farmers, talk with local politicians. The revetting process offers a great potential for conflicts, unfortunately. The land use is limited on the revetted area due to the high water table. This is a reason why land acquisition is important, because the peatland areas in Bavaria are often divided into many small plots of land with different landowners. Land reallocation is an important tool to create state-owned hydrological units big enough for revetting. The main technical challenge for peatland restoration in Bavaria is keeping the water in the landscape. On the right-hand side, you can see some impressions how drainage systems are blocked and dams for water retention are built. Well, I hope I could give you a short impression of our efforts. And the next slide. Thank you very much for your attention.
A big thank you to Bavaria, and I'm pretty sure that everybody could understand you very well. Thank you very much. So people are nodding here, so every word was understood. We now move to the third presentation, and this is Bärbel Thiemeyer. Bärbel works at the Thünen-Institut in Braunschweig. That is a scientific body associated to our Ministry of Agriculture. And she's a peatland scientist, but also one of her responsibilities is to compile data for the reporting of emissions from organic soils to the Climate Convention. And Bärbel will now talk about monitoring and reporting of emissions from organic soils in Germany. Thank you, Bärbel, that you are here, and not here, but with us, and we are listening to your talk.
Hello. I'm sorry. Bildschirm. Do you hear me? Because it said screen sharing was interrupted. Do you see everything? Oh, I'm sorry, because I tested and it worked well. Thank you, Franziska, for the invitation, and also a warm welcome to Glasgow to all peatlanders and peatlanders to be. As Franziska said, I will be talking about some numbers on greenhouse gas emissions and also on how a brighter future might look like. As you have heard before, the situation in Germany is a good example of a bad example. So most of the peatlands are dry and mainly used for agriculture. That is, it is mainly used as grassland, which can be quite intensive in use. There's around 7% of peatland which is not utilized, which might be wet or slightly wet. And there's also some peat extraction left and also some peat under settlement. When we look at the water table distribution, as expected, the croplands are drier than the grasslands. And the unutilized land is wetter than the other land use types. This is based on a statistical model, which we also use for the emission reporting. If we now dig into the soil of the German peatlands, we have both bog peat and fan peat, and most of the peatlands are located either in the north or in the very south of Germany. And as you can see from this map, the peatlands are not equally distributed over Germany, so the challenge is larger in some part than in others. But well, we are Germans, and if we do things, we do them properly. So we also drained our bogs and fenced properly, and also plowed them deeply and covered them with sand to improve trafficability and land use. And so we have these very strongly degraded shallow peat and also very weird things like this. We know, at least for the shallow covered and the wasted peat, that they have higher emissions as well, and also these kind of things have high carbon stocks, so they need to be addressed as well. And you can see in the map some blue stars. These are peatlands where measurements on greenhouse gas emissions have taken place in the past. So not only in Bavaria, but in all peatland-rich regions in Germany. And we have about 120 sites with greenhouse gas data, most of them more than 1 year. And I will try to show you a short summary of this and try not to talk too long onto details. So what you see here, you have seen this in some variation, probably very often. It's a relation between water table depths and CO2 emissions. And every dot you see here is a mean value of several years of measurements. What you also can see here, that whether we have grassland or cropland is not decisive on the amount of emissions. So there's no easy way out, like converting just from cropland to grassland. You have to really do something about the water table. And what you also see here, that you have quite a bit of scatter around our model through this data. Some reasons, I don't have the time to go into detail here, are the intra-annual distribution of the water levels. And the emissions, of course, happen in the upper centimeters of the soil, and due to different properties of the peat, the water level is not a perfect proxy for the moisture in the topsoil. And of course, peat is not peat. It is as variable as mineral soil, so it differs in soil organic carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus stocks, and in other properties. And what is really important is the carbon stocks, not the content. So a shallow peat might have quite high stocks of carbon stored because it's denser than the undisturbed peat. Well, unfortunately, not the time to go into detail. So we take this model and combine it with the water table depths I mentioned earlier. We developed a statistical model based on around 1,100 dip well time series, and try to estimate the water level for all organic soils in Germany. This is well, a bit ambitious, but we did it anyway. And we now can calculate emissions for every dot on the map. We add the dissolved organic carbon export from the wetland supplement and get our implied emission factors for all land use categories, as we have seen in the earlier talk by Maxwell Kaspers. We have a similar approach for methane, but of course exponential, also including emissions from ditches. And we used class means for nitrous oxide because this is a gas which is really difficult to model. Summing all this up, we've seen the numbers before. We have around 53 megatons per CO2 equivalents per year. And this means it's more than 40% of the emissions from agriculture and agricultural soils. We are nearing 7% of the total German greenhouse gas budget. So it's quite obvious that something has to be done. Our reporting methodology is now consistent with the wetland supplement. But you see in this figure, which shows the total emissions from the different land use categories, that one very important category is still missing. This is the re-wetted peatlands, and I will talk the last remaining minutes about progress with data and also with mitigation options. And I will focus, because of time, on bog peatlands. Yeah, the current situation is that we have often intensive agricultural use, and the other end of the scale, if you put these pictures into a scale of land use intensity and water level, is nice, only slightly disturbed peatlands. And by chance, I took a picture from Bavaria. So I hope you're happy with that, that you're shown here as a good example. And well, we have the classical rewetting approaches, often in cases of bogs, after peat extraction. And sometimes also after agricultural use, getting to more or less moist or wet grasslands. Nowadays, and I'm sure you have heard lots about it, we have also sphagnum paludiculture, which has hydrological conditions as close as possible to natural peatlands. And there is also some experimental experiments going on, submerged drains, so raising the water level in agricultural used peat and preserving the high land use intensity required for dairy farming. And now comes the last slide with data. This is the aggregated data for bog peatlands, German data only, and some preliminary results included. CO2 is in green and methane is in blue. And of course, there's methane when rewetting, but looking at the huge reduction of CO2, reframing from restoration because of fearing methane, it seems to me a bit like chewing COVID because of fearing the side effects of the vaccination. So still, side effects should be kept, of course, as mild as possible. And this means targeting more or less natural vegetation. So if we can achieve sphagnum carpets or similar vegetation, we come to a situation which has not even 5.5 million tons of CO2 equivalents, but close to zero. And you also see here some paludiculture data included, which is not yet with harvest, but even under difficult conditions, very hot summers, very degraded soils, including dams, irrigation, and so on, we will only have 5 to 10 tons of CO2 equivalents per hectare in here. And this is really the worst case, I guess. We have still huge emissions compared to the current conditions. And what you also can see here is that so far the submerged drains on intensive grassland don't offer the perspective of emission reduction. So I still have 2 slides. As you can see on this last figure, there's already abundant flux data for refining our emission factors. Of course, I wouldn't be a good scientist if I wouldn't complain about data gaps. There are some, especially for fan peatlands and fan peatland paludiculture, but research projects are ongoing or on the way to start. And we are also have launched a peatland monitoring program, which will improve long-term data on subsidence. And we will also improve our water table model and do quite a few of other things. The main challenge when including restoration into the inventory is where and especially when restoration activities have happened, especially in the past, because we always have to build up a time series. And we also need to know how successful were they. We can go and ask people, of course. We can hope to rely on the IX for measures on agricultural land, and perhaps we can in future use remote sensing approaches, either for vegetation, for soil moisture, and for land subsidence. So there's some work to be done, but if peatland restoration will speed up, I hope we will be up to the task to include it into the inventory. To conclude, as you have heard earlier, organic soils in Germany are really a strong source of greenhouse gases, but they still store large amounts of SOC, which needs to be protected and protected urgently. When we are looking on bog peat, successful water management, as you all know, is a key, both for classic rewetting and sphagnum paludiculture, but methane is rarely a serious issue, even in polders, so flooded areas in bog peatlands. On fan peat, there are more diverse in all things, also in greenhouse gas emissions, and there are still some data gaps, but the data will be available. I'm quite sure about it. And the main challenge for future reporting is not so much the emission factors, but the location, the extent, and the success of peatland protection measures. With this, I would like to conclude and thank everyone who financed the research projects, because their measuring greenhouse gases is quite expensive and would not have been possible with everyone who was involved in the field, in the lab, at the computer, and so on. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Bärbel, for speaking to us. And of course, it was a bit first very bleak, 53 megatons per year. This is really a lot. But you already said something needs to be done. And we will now hear more about what is already on its way. We have now 3 shorter presentations. And the first speaker is Jan Peters, who's actually here with us in Glasgow. He's the director of the Zucco Foundation and will talk about stakeholder involvement and dialogue processes about peatland protection in Germany.
Yeah, thank you, Franziska. And I'm glad to be here to talk about what can be done and what needs to be done, because we have seen that the situation is very bad. Actually, 90% degraded, it's still like positively addressed. Actually, we only have 1 or 2% left in near natural state. All the rest is degraded and disturbed by drainage. We have very in-depth science knowledge, what we have heard. We have political agreements and strategy in place. We even have some money now on the table. But what we need is, of course, the people who bring that into practice, to get them on board and to avoid the conflicts, which have been already addressed here as well. So I would like to talk to you about stakeholder involvement, which we already started even long before the official process of the consultation for the federal peatland strategy started. Within the project, which we call More Dialogue, the Peatland Dialogue, which was funded within the National Climate Initiative of the German Environmental Ministry. And we had very diverse groups in the dialogue. Of course, the farmers, as you have heard, most of the peatlands are drained for agriculture in Germany, conservationists, which have a strong focus on biodiversity, of course, but also more and more on climate change issues. The water boards, because actually these are the ones who are in charge for the drainage and who know how that works hydrologically. So these are also the best partners to advise us and to do the job to re-wet it, to make the measures to re-wet the areas again. Politicians, administrations who should be able and enabled to guide the process, scientists, and also private sector, the businesses. And what we have done, what were the different sources of intervention? So one thing which is very important is, of course, the communication. So because people have to understand why peatlands are important and what are the challenges. What are the challenges we are facing? What are the solutions also, best practices we can use? So we organized a lot of field days, lectures at universities, information events with the stakeholders in the region, but also in the cities. We produced a lot of communication materials, like nice postcards showing the issue with nice infographics. Some of them you will find on the table in the back to show see that later. And we created a knowledge platform in the internet. Unfortunately, so far it's only in German, www.morewissen.de. But we are also working on an English version, which hopefully comes soon. Then knowledge transfer between stakeholders is very important. We identified the key actors in the regions. We built capacity within expert workshops on different topics with the right stakeholders, but also in direct consultations. So because the most important thing is to speak to each other, to get to know, okay, where are the conflicts, why are there, what are the different interests related to peatlands. Then networking, building up network between the different stakeholder groups showed to be very important. So we organized a lot of dialogue, exchange visits. We initiated corporations in different regions. So now we work in another National Climate Initiative project where we work specifically in model regions, where we build up these networks of farmers, of businesses who can then process the biomass with the market, all these things. So we organized roundtables, landscape walks. So that was a very good measure within the pandemic, that you go outside and don't sit in a room and discuss the issues and also see where the pressing issues are. We build up regional cooperation. And of course, one major part is this building up of the value chain. And one thing where this also fed it into the regions, into the states again, was the Zukunftsrat in Mecklenburg-Pomerania, so the Council for the Future, which was co-chaired by Franziska as well. So a lot of these insights also went back into this council and into the final document, which is now the basis for policy making in the future of the federal state, which is in the northeast of Germany. And the third thing is, of course, the evaluation. So what actually is the impact of the measures? What do we achieve together with the stakeholders? So we assessed and also visualized the data, which is there on maps, in infographics, to show these greenhouse gas emission maps, which also Mr. Gütler showed from Bavaria. We also made that for other regions, for other federal states in Germany. And we worked on feasibility studies or feasibility maps for paludiculture. So where can you really apply paludiculture and where do you better leave peatlands to nature as a concept for decision making. And one of the most important stakeholder groups are, of course, the farmers. So we worked quite a lot with farmers, and we even created a new image for them, or together with them actually, the More Klimawirt, we call it. So we also have a logo for them. In English, I would translate that with peatland carbon farmers, like family Petri here from Brandenburg, close to Berlin, who completely wants to change their farming on the peatlands to more wetter soils, to use the hay, even from the wet meadows, having water buffaloes and so on. And this positive image also for farmers, that they are not the enemies of peatland rewetting, but they are our partners, this is very important and proved to be very important. Another thing which is also very important is to involve private sector, the businesses. So that's why we started beginning of this year a new corporation which we called Tomorrow. This more means peatland in German. So we know that tomorrow is spelled differently in English, but this has a purpose here to put the more in the future and in the middle, in the center, and look to the future. And there we cooperate with the Umweltstiftung Michael Otto, which is the foundation of Michael Otto, which is the owner of the biggest German mail order company, which also have like a parcel service, for example, and they have a quite strong, quite ambitious CSR strategy. So they want to become climate neutral already in 2030, and they really count on peatlands in there, not only for carbon credits, but they also want to use the biomass from paludiculture in their own value chain. So they considering using, for example, the paludi biomass from a rewetted peatlands for their packaging, or for their parcels. So these pictures, these very nice pictures, this is Michael Otto together with the founder of our foundation, Michael Zucco, shows that we have to bring together conservationists, farmers, and the business to create a new momentum for a real large-scale scheme. And what is always important, also like Jochen Flasbarth and Franziska mentioned, that is to create emotions, bring the people outside, like here in one of the peatlands, where they are walking to really build up this momentum. And with this, I would like to thank you for your attention and would like to end with our slogan, which was invented by Hans, More muss nass. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for this inspiring talk about what's going on and also the perspectives, also with the private sector. We now move on to a different level, to the European level. And actually, we had a speaker from the General Directorate for Climate, but he's still too heavily involved with negotiations. So we're very glad that we have now Herwig Ranner. He's from the General Directorate for Agriculture, from the Climate Unit, and he will present a few thoughts about the European policy framework, which is really decisive for the fate of peatlands in Germany. Welcome, and we're looking forward to your speech.
Invitation. In the Commission, we also do things properly, so we have a PowerPoint. So if you could put that on. Yes. Some of you might have seen me running around, so I'm also involved in the agriculture negotiations, together with some other people that are sitting there. We would like to give you a short overview of what we do at the EU level concerning peatlands and wetlands. So if you go to the next slide, we will talk about agriculture, about biodiversity, we will talk about the economics, then also about development, and also the economy side and finance. So what kind of support might you get from the European level? So let's start with the A, so that would be the next slide. So as a matter of fact, we have some agriculture activities already going on, and sometimes some might say too many. And that we heard that before, so we need to do something to protect the peatlands and wetlands. And in the negotiations on the Common Agriculture Policy that was just adopted a couple months ago, we also made sure to have one good environmental and agricultural condition in, which would be the number 2, and that is on protection of peatlands and wetlands, on organic soils. And what does that mean? It should mean that you have a minimum level of protection. And then additional to that, and we will come to that a bit later, you will also have the possibility to do more, and that would be through the eco schemes or through measures under rural development. Then as the new thing is the farm to fork strategy, where we have a focus also on carbon farming, and we heard about possibilities for carbon farming on peatlands. There will be communication out that is done by the Commission. There's already a handbook on carbon farming techniques that was done by colleagues from the JRC. And if you're interested, we can certainly provide you with the link, but maybe most of you know it already. And then we also have a long-term view on rural areas, because as a matter of fact, for the Commission, it's very important to make sure that we have the infrastructure and the incentives so that people also stay in rural areas. Because still now we have a movement of people from the rural areas into the big cities. So if there's something we can do to, not to halt that, but at least to moderate that, because you also need structures in the rural areas, then as part of it, you also have climate action in peatlands that might create jobs and that might keep people in the rural areas. So if you go to the next slide, we heard about the importance for biodiversity. So as you know, we have the biodiversity strategy. We have EU-wide ecosystem assessments. We have nature restoration targets. And a soil strategy that we will try to build. And we have tried, I think, twice already. And we hope, or sincerely hope, that this time we will succeed in having a soil strategy, because we have seen that this is a very important instrument that allows you to focus many different actors and to have a common view on what to do to work on our soils and protect our soils. Then the next slide, please. So now when we talk about what kind of climate action can you carry out, we have measures that are stated under the adaptation strategy. So in part, keeping the peatlands in good conditions will help us with adapting to climate change, because if the water levels are higher and if the peatland is in a good condition, it will more likely survive than if not. At the same time, we have a review of the LULUCF regulation. There are other colleagues in the room that know a lot more about that, but let's just say we realized that we need to change it because of the changing targets we have at the European level. But the Green Deal, Fit for 55, and so forth. Then we also have a review of the Renewable Energy Directive. All of that you see is linked to the Fit for 55 initiative that will keep my colleagues, myself, and other colleagues very busy for the next couple of months. And then you also have sustainable carbon cycles. So you need to make sure that you somehow upscale the protection of the carbon that is already in peatlands, but also, if needed, to sequester carbon and to have a carbon farming approach that is overarching and makes sense for the whole region, at least, and for the whole EU, if possible. That also means that you need to certify whenever people manage to store carbon, or you might even certify how much carbon you have protected, but that's all discussions that are ongoing. So there's nothing new for the moment. It's just concepts, but they will be developed. Then we talk about the development. So that's the next slide. And there we also talk about science and how science is financed in the EU. You all might be familiar with the Horizon 2020 programs. There's also the Horizon Europe program, and I will not go into all the details mentioned here, but you can have a look later. But just to show that there are some funds already that are targeting peatlands and peatland protection or restoration. And there's also a live program that looks into carbon farming. Carbon farming is a topic that is very much on the top of the agenda for many people. Everybody talks about it, but not many people have a good idea how to actually carry it out. So there will be a bit more research and development needed there. Then we go to the next slide. and I think that's one before the last, because I'm standing between you and your coffee, I imagine. I don't know if you can still hear me. The bioeconomy strategy, circular economy action plan, renovation wave strategy, and sustainable products initiative, that are all things where we try to integrate also peatlands or any products you would create in peatlands or on peatlands into the overall circular economy approach. So one of the ways to reduce emissions and to make sure that we have a good management of our resources is to focus on a circular economy approach. And that would mean that you develop new solutions when it comes to polludiculture or other things that you carry out on peatlands and wetlands. At one point, that might also involve ocean-based wetlands. So what do you do on the quite big surfaces that you have in the north of Europe that are for the moment mainly for the protection of bird species and other species and flood protection and so forth. But you might also come up with ideas what to use them for in a different way. You will look at environmental footprints. Let's go to the next slide because I don't have enough time. It's a more interesting slide because we talk about finance. And so what we said before is that under the Common Agriculture Policy, you have direct payments, where some of the action on peatlands will be incentivized. Then you have everything that runs under the rural development funds, but especially under the direct payments is a specific envelope, which is the eco schemes, which is specific for the member states, and it should be brought up, developed by the member states, and is an obligation, let's say, for the member states. But the farmers have to be incentivized, so the actions proposed have to be interesting enough so that you have buy-in from the farmers. And we already worked on a possible list of eco schemes to help the member states. As you know, we have the strategic plans coming in from most of the member states now, the draft plans. I will work on some of them. And there we will also closely look at if there's peatlands, in certain member states you have a lot of them, and to see what can be done to help the member state, but also the peatlands. So this is not a punitive, it's not an action to punish member states, but it's more to work with them to see what can be done and how to formulate eco schemes in a way that they are interesting, that you have a lot of buy-in. Then you also have state aid going into environmental protection. And then we also have a quite complex issue, which is the sustainable finance and the so-called taxonomy. So where you try to define which actions or which finance actions would be contributing to mitigation or adaptation, so to climate action. You need to be very precise to see if you finance an action that you can more or less determine what does it do, because we all have targets to achieve in that area. And these were very difficult discussions on the whole taxonomy question. And yeah, I think I would like to stop there. But if you have any further questions, please ask, and please also ask my colleagues that are sitting, some of them in the room. And some of them have been heavily involved also in discussions on taxonomy and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Herwig, for the EU-level perspective. And we now move on to an even more international level. We will listen to Diana Kopensky. She's speaking actually from Nairobi. Diana is coordinator of the Global Peatlands Initiative, and she works for the UN Environment Program. And she will be our last speaker today before we go to the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Francisca, and everyone that is crowding the Peatlands Pavilion. My team has been keeping me up to speed on, and the collaborators there sending us messages. So thank you so much for being here, and please do stay on. It's really a pleasure to be here with you virtually from Nairobi. I work with the United Nations Environment Program, and I lead the Global Peatlands Initiative. It's an initiative to save peatlands as the world's largest terrestrial organic carbon stock. And the Global Peatlands Initiative is really a dynamic partnership. It was established at the UNFCCC COP in Marrakesh in 2016 and is supported with funding by the International Climate Initiative of the German Environment Ministry. In just 5 years, the GPI has grown from 13 to 46 organizations strong. We're all working to support countries around the world to conserve, restore, and sustainably manage their peatlands. And through the Global Peatlands Initiative project, we also provide direct support together with FAO and others to 4 tropical peatland partner countries of Indonesia, the Republic of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Peru. And we're really making big strides in their policy and planning efforts, helping to establish important institutions and advancing their peatlands restoration and protection work in line with the inclusion into their NDCs. We've been working around the world with stakeholders to connect practitioners, scientists, investors, and policymakers through facilitated collaboration. This is critical to have this peer-to-peer exchange. It really enables us to advance our work on science, policy, and practice all at once and at speed. And the GPI is not taking a linear approach. We are trying to enable change through big leaps built upon the knowledge and experience of others. And we're really trying to start waves of change for policymaking, for the policymaking community across river basins and across disciplines, and for people. And we've successfully forged some new partnerships and enabled actions based on the best practice with a sense of togetherness to create the scale and speed that we need to start addressing the climate and nature emergencies through this incredible tool which we have, which are peatlands. The GPI project has brought the best science to policymakers in the South. We've had global forums, South-South exchanges, and through that, we secured the Brazzaville Declaration for Peatlands of the Congo Basin. We've helped to establish the International Tropical Peatland Center, and we've supported negotiators for the United Nations Environment Assembly number 4, the resolution on the conservation and sustainable management of peatlands. We provided key science-based work like the Smoke on Water Rapid Response Assessment, and also worked with leading scientists, including Hans Houston, who wrote the Permafrost Peatlands chapter in the UNEP Frontiers report. This is a critical collection of top emerging environmental issues that deserve attention, and peatlands were prominent there. We've also brought Indigenous people representatives, practitioners, scientists, ministers, and private sector partners together to exchange peer-to-peer. And there was a sense of acknowledgement of the impact of that exchange with open peer-to-peer true exchange where the truth and experiences exchange. We have made huge impacts, and the Global Peatlands Initiative project and partners were called out as a best practice for UNEP, but not just for UNEP, across the entire UN system. We've been championed as SDG 7, Life on Land, an example to look to. And that is really because of the partners and the people and the passion that everyone comes to this subject about. Even though the GPI's original aim was to support 3 tropical peatland countries, we didn't stop there. Peatland degradation and protection is a global issue. So we've been supporting, strengthening, and establishing new networks for peatlands action around the world. We've brought together multiple stakeholders and peers in Canada, Southeast Asia, for example, in Mongolia, Africa. We're going to hear from new partners coming together in Patagonia and also in Europe in the next 2 days. So this is just a tiny little snapshot that some of the direct work that we've supported through the UNEP implemented GPI project, but the GPI partners have done so much more. And this is why we're seeing the pace, the attention, and the rate of change. We've had some pleasure of hearing some of what they've been up to over these 2 weeks here at the Peatlands Pavilion, the first one ever at a COP. And we are collecting through the remarkable virtual Peatlands Pavilion those stories, those experiences, and those resources for everyone. All of this work has really enabled countries, including Germany, England, DRC, Peru, Chile, and more, to advance on peatlands policy and planning. They're creating new networks, institutions, and strengthening existing networks to accelerate action and impact for nature and climate change. We're really, honestly, the generation that needs to get it done. We can leave this planet in better shape for the future generations than we found it in. And as policymakers, practitioners, scientists, and concerned citizens, we have an opportunity through Peatlands to make the choices apparent that support the next and future generations. Thank you so much to the team in Germany that have been working really hard to put in a dynamic, multi-stakeholder peatlands plan. And we just commend you for the openness, and we really appreciate that you're taking your time now to share it with others. Please, for everyone out there, there's a lot to learn, but we can do it quickly if we share openly and honestly. Please do join us as the Global Peatlands Initiative.
Thank you so much, Diana. We will move on now to questions. We received quite a lot of questions already from the platform, but you are also invited to ask questions, of course, and I will somehow mix it from the audience here and from what we had already virtually. I start with a question. So there's an upvoting of the questions as well. It received 9 votes already, 9 likes, so it is the highest voted question. And the question is a question to Wolfram Güttler about Barbaria. What happens to the 2/3 of peatlands in Barbaria that are not revetted until 2050?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, I have 3 daughters and they force me to answer these questions all the day. So I really have this question also in mind. But my answer would be just have a look on the 1/3 we want to revet. If we have success, if the farmers cooperate with us, if the local politicians say, yes, you are right, we want to agree with you, then I think the next 2/3 will get success too. But just one step after another, otherwise we wouldn't have a chance. And I'm honestly, I have to say, we have also demonstrations against revetting projects. So we have to do a lot. And if our politicians would say we want to revet 100% of our peatlands, well, we had some more demonstrations, and I think that would stop the whole process. So I think just slowly, but with clear targets, and if we are successful, that would be the best solutions for the others. And well, I want to be honest, we have, well, the biggest airport in Bavaria is in the peatland area. We have settlements situated in peatlands. We have a prison, a very big prison in a peatland area. So we won't have the opportunity to revet 100%, even if we only think about climate. We will have to say in some cases we can't revet these areas because otherwise we have to, for example, remove the biggest airport in Bavaria.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think that's a challenge in many parts of Germany. Thank you. So far, oh, Rob, please. So So I continue with another one, and then we have Rob. So first, a question to Herwig about European Union level. Why will there be still subsidies for draining peatlands under the new common agricultural policy?
Okay. We heard this question before. And it's not subsidies to drain peatlands, it's incentives to protect peatlands, because you have a conditionality in the direct payments. Of course, you can see it as the glass is half empty or half full. That's for everybody to choose, but we choose to look at it in a different way. So as a farmer, you only get these direct payments if you work in a certain way, which is defined by the conditionality. And then it also depends, as I've said before, on the member states to have good eco schemes, and then you will have a bit more protection, and also maybe in the rural development programs to put some measures in there. So it would be a bit unfair to say we continue to subsidize drainage of peatland. It's a point of view. We would not share that point of view. We have a bit more of a constructive point of view. At least we will try. And I hope that in a couple of years we will see already a little bit of a difference there.
Understand it right? On all areas that are drained at the moment, the direct payments would continue. There's no new drainage, but the continued drainage would be allowed. Yeah.
Yes, but then you enter in a very complex discussion. So where do you stop? What was drained 500 years ago, or 250 years ago, or 70 years ago? I mean, this is a discussion that we are not likely to be able to solve.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just worth saying a bit of context for this question. We're in the Glasgow COP here, and the big issue is that the world has pledged to get warming down to 2.3 degrees, which is great. But we know we have to go to 1.5 degrees, and there's a massive gulf there. And if we don't get to 1.5 degrees, we face a very, very uncertain future. When we look at German peatlands, and I could say the same about any country, so please don't think I'm picking on German peatlands. I think it was 44% of emissions from agriculture and land use coming from German peatlands on just 7% of agricultural land. This is the absolutely low-hanging fruit of land use change in Germany. And as I say, I could say about any peatland-dominated country. And yet the federal targets, I think, were only 10% of peatland emissions being reduced over this decade. And we know that it's this decade that's really important to get us down to 1.5 degrees. Germany shows tremendous leadership through the European Union in these climate change negotiations. So I wonder if the urgency of your peatland re-wetting program reflects the climate emergency that we're actually in.
Question to Mechthild.
Yes, Franziska, thank you. It's my pleasure to take this question. I think it's a question that I can understand well if you only look at the numbers, but if you look at the ambition that we need already to re-wet those areas that we need for 5 million tons, then to me that is a different picture. And what is important to me is that Germany really takes it serious to get climate neutral by 2045. This is what is in our Climate Change Act, and the land use sector is contributing to this. So at the moment, the land use sector in Germany is a net sink, and we are improving this net sink as the emissions from peatlands are calculated into the net sink. They are on the one hand, and you have the forest sink on the other hand. So this is what is calculated together, and overall, what we have as a contribution at the moment will bring us to climate neutrality. And if you look at peatland re-wetting, you also have to keep in mind that peatland measures take quite a time to be effective. So if we take money now and we start re-wetting projects, there's a long process of, first of all, convincing the farmers. Then you need permissions to change certain things with the water bodies. Later on, you have to wait until the water is in all of the area, and only by then you will see the climate change outcome. So it will be that we have a lot of projects already starting, but not already contributing in emission reductions by 2030. So we had to keep all of this in mind when we drew the targets. And to me, it's very important that we have realistic targets that we will be able to reach. And I think it's also important that we really partner with our farmers and make them our partners in climate protection. So we need some time for that as well. I can assure you, we will try to be as ambitious as possible. We will try to even do more than the 5 million tons that we have on our minds at the moment. But this is like, there are estimates out there. This may be like 100,000 hectares of complete rewetting and 200,000 hectares of partial rewetting. This is huge areas and it's huge impact on farmers and on the regions. So this is what we have at the moment. I can assure you it's in line with our goal of climate neutrality. And if we can do more, we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Mechthild. The next question, a bit short in time. How do we overcome the stakeholders' deeply rooted skepticism against rewetting in Germany? Not only landowners, but also people living in the surroundings. I think that's a question to Jan.
Yeah, that's a very good question. How do we overcome that? I mean, first of all, I think it's really important to show them the facts which are there, which Rob already addressed in his intervention, that really the numbers are much, much higher than you think, that the emissions, these are emissions which you don't see, but which continuously are emitted from these sites. So there's absolutely in most of the regions no awareness of this. So these facts are not known. So this is one, but of course it's not only the understanding, it's also the emotional part, because peatlands actually have quite a bad image in not only in Germany but also in other European countries. These are wastelands. When they are wet, they are dangerous. They are not. You can drown in them. All these things. They have mosquitoes. Diseases will come when climate change. We will even get malaria back in Germany. All these things come up, and there are actually good arguments against that. But there are also good. What we also need is to take the people on board and show them actually that peatlands can be beautiful and that they have a value, not only the economic value, not only the agricultural value, but also a value of beauty and all the ecosystem services they provide. So I think this awareness rising and opening up the people to this is very important. And then, of course, what is also important is to not leave the people alone which are living in the peatland area, because we always compare that with the phase out of coal use in Germany. This is also focused just in some regions. You have seen that in Bärbel's presentation, focused in some regions, and they have to take all the burden for the transformation. So they need to be taken on board, and there need to be measures for kind of shared burden and kind of a big guidance which shows that the society, actually the whole society, is paying for that and is compensating for them for their share which they have to take. And I think this is really important to make it clear, not leaving people alone, bringing emotions into the discussion as well, and to show also positive pictures, like how landscapes can look like in the future. These are very important points, I think.
Thank you, Jan. I'm asking again to the audience, any more questions from here? Neil? Oh yeah, first Neil.
Yeah, I'd like to ask just I suppose a quite straightforward question. I mean, there's a lot of interest in getting rewetting and restoration done, most certainly. But what about the legislative aspects of it? I mean, I think they can be quite important to, for example, I was given an example by Hans Houston earlier of water levels in Indonesia, that if legislation comes in to underpin, restoration aspects, it can be quite a powerful tool. Just asking, are there any plans in this regard in Germany?
Take this question. Wolfram, thanks.
Well, I can give a very short example, but in our new Bavarian nature conservation law, we have one article, and it says it is not allowed to create new drainage systems. And this is a very important sign. It's not, we can't stop existing drainage systems, but we can now say new drainage system is forbidden. And if you know, in peat soils, the soil is reducing, and we have more and more problems with how to get the water out. So, well, we will have a legal and some experience to say to farmers, well, you are not allowed to drainage this area anymore. And so it may be an alternative, and we have some farmers who then say, okay, polycultures would be an alternative. But I think the most important thing to answer the question before, we have to create alternatives, and alternatives for the farmers they can do. For example, we have potato farming in many fans, and if you have potatoes, and if you have to change to paludiculture, it's a hard way, and we have to help the farmers to go this way.
Thank you. The next question from Bernhard.
Yeah, Bernhard Osterburg from Thünen Institute, Germany. Again, a question regarding the direct payments, because they are so important, because it's a message to the agricultural community how to use the land. And of course, it's not so easy to make those payments more transformative, as we do not really want to make them disruptive in the area. That would be very hard to really change the game at once. But I'm convinced we have to really rethink a bit that with slight conditions not to worsen the situation, it's not really enough to change the direction of the development of land use on peatland. And there, the common agricultural policy is quite important. Therefore, my question would be, at the moment, if I set aside or do something very different from normal agriculture, I will be discriminated. I will lose the direct payments in the normal system. And how to avoid this first? And would it be possible to place projects of carbon farming in a way on those areas while keeping direct payments viable, and to to create a situation where the farmers are on the safe side, because they had now run into a risk to lose all their direct payments, so the profitability of their farms. That's the current situation. So nobody's moving.
Thank you, Bernhard, for the easy question. First, I would want to say that in this case, the CAP as we have it is the result of a very tense negotiation between the Parliament and the Council, and it's based on a proposal by the Commission. And it does not always look the same when it goes in and when it comes out. So it also depends on all these actors and what they want to achieve, and it's a democracy, so it's a democratic process that shapes the rules. We would, of course, also say that yes, you can always do more. You could have tougher laws. Your question on the direct payments, or how to make sure that the farmers keep direct payments in this case, I would have to ask a colleague, to be very honest. I can't answer that question here, but it's an interesting one, and we will get back to you. So that would be for our colleagues from the F1 unit and from D2. But I'm pretty sure they foresaw such cases. There must be a way around. But it's also the case that, I mean, we do not force anybody off their land and tell them to stop certain practices immediately with police force to convince them. It's a process that will take a lot of time, and you can't re-vet everywhere, as has been said, because there's infrastructure on certain parcels. And yeah, as an Austrian chancellor once said, it's all very complicated.
we started a bit later. I think 2 quick questions we would do more. So there's one online question I'd like to take. Why not put a substantial amount of peatlands under protection without use? Because often the unsustainable drainage-based use is also not giving a lot of value. Why not reward landowners for protection and giving the highest value in terms of biodiversity and climate protection? Maybe back to Mechthild, would that be something feasible?
Thank you. Yes, we have measures on all aspects. We do have measures on nature conservation, and we do have the idea of perhaps expanding protected areas that we have so far. But to be honest, for the huge areas that we have at the moment and that we have to deal with, this is not the concept we are following. We have to see that there's a lot of people depending on the money they gain on those areas, and we want to help them to have a future business on those revetted soils. And this is what we are doing research for. This is what we have in mind. We want those peatland protection measures as nature-based solutions, as we call for them in other areas as well. We want them for the climate, for biodiversity, and for the people. So we want to keep the people in work. And yes, nature conservation is very important as well. And we have to look into both. But for the huge areas, it's keeping the areas productive. This is what we are aiming for.
Thank you. And the very last question from Hans Joosten. He was earlier.
Yes, we are here at the Climate Convention, and in the Climate Convention it is actually decided that the richest countries should carry the heaviest weight. I ask myself how Bavaria thinks, and also Germany, to come away with the situation that the richest federal state in one of the richest countries of the world say that they are going to reduce 30%, where actually 100% is needed. How can you make in this way an example to poor countries who have to intensify also their rewetting activities?
Thank you, Hans. Back to Bavaria or Mechthild.
Yes, if I may, I would like to take the question. I think this is a misunderstanding that we discussed before. The Paris Agreement is very important, and it says that we have to get climate neutral and reach a 1.5 degrees Celsius goal, but it does not say how we are supposed to do it. So if we have residual emissions and we make up for those by our sinks, that is one way to get climate neutral. And I don't think that we should talk about the peatlands to be or having to be climate neutral, because this would imply that we do something that we could not do without destroying infrastructure that is on there. We talked today already about airports, about cities, about villages, about people that are living there, and we have to care about those. And I think the important thing is to bring things together and make them work towards the goal that we all have, the shared goal of climate neutrality, of meeting the Paris goals. But this is possible also without rewetting all of the peatlands. But we have to be ambitious. This is what we want to do. We have now set our goal for 2030, and we will most surely continue afterwards. We will have a new government coming shortly in place, which just is negotiating its treaty and is talking about getting much more climate ambitious. So I'm sure that in the future, Germany will follow this path. But we have to take one step after the other. And I really don't think that there is a need to talk about things that we cannot accomplish.
Thank you, Mechthild. I think the level of ambition is something that we will intensively discuss in the coming years, and even now, I think, because it is necessary. I was just on a panel in the Indonesian pavilion. They have rewetted 3.5 million hectares, and this is Indonesia. This is not Germany or Bavaria. So I think we are learning here also a lot from other countries, and we need to discuss ambition, but I fully agree that we need to get our food in practice on the peatlands, on the ground, with stakeholders, with paludiculture examples, with demonstration sites, which are now funded by the ministry in all federal states, to move forward. And then we can raise ambition, hopefully. So thank you very much to all panelists here and online, to all here in the audience. I think we learned a lot about how it can actually work in a country like Germany, how we can start in a country like Germany, really addressing this big challenge with stakeholder involvement, with finding new ways of agriculture on wet peatlands. There's a picture of a rewetted peatland with paludiculture here hanging in the Peatland Pavilion. It's from Germany. It's a 10-hectare cattail site and actually funded by our Ministry of Agriculture in a project. and that we also need a holistic approach. We need to look at landscapes, at catchments, and at the socio-economic conditions in regions. And last but not least, that it is key to exchange, to share knowledge, and to collaborate. So thank you all also for your questions here. And a special thanks to the organizing team of the Peatland Pavilion. I see many faces here around. And again, very much to our tech team, the two Toms, who are excellent and helping us all the time with the tech. So have a nice evening, afternoon, and see you back in the Peatland Pavilion soon. Thank you.